Cool. Yeah, so I'd like to run through some more of the building out the REST interface in Flask. I figured a good way to do that would be to run through the uh, last lab in the that section. It's just building out that interface, the plants one. I think this. I don't think it was an old code challenge, but it's very close to one I think we had. Um, So before we get into it, I'd like to hear a little bit about where you're at and what kind of stuff you'd be interested in focusing on. We don't have to do everyone, uh, but yeah, but anyone can speak up and say where you're at and what you want to take a look at. All
I'm
right.
mostly just here to absorb information personally. Maybe seeing it up front a little bit will help when I'm going through the content here in another, oh, if I had to guess, like 3 hours, but
Cool.
I'll be there soon.
That
3 hours.
is also why I'm here.
So I
I'm
envy.
not here yet, but I just want to absorb the information.
Cool. Um, we'll see how that works learning wise. Uh, cool. Anyone else? Or even if you're not up to this point, is there anything that you're hitting now or seeing coming up that you'd like more explanation on or going deeper into?
Are you talking about the Flask RESTful lab?
The Python P4 Flask RESTful CRUD lab. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And that is the I think that is the code challenge we did for React,
Oh yeah,
just
maybe.
with the
Yeah,
Flask backend.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's it. Um,
Yeah. One question that I have is notice for some of the labs for the post specifically, it uses like you're requesting from a form
mhm,
as opposed to like for some of them you're doing like data requests get JSON.
mhm.
And it's I don't know if I missed it, but I feel like it didn't really
You didn't.
explain what's the difference. That's something I would kind of like to know a little bit more about, maybe.
Yeah, you didn't miss it. Um, I actually had that conversation with our curriculum folks yesterday because so let's roll back a little bit. So when you're making an HTTP request with a post or patch or put, you're going to be sending along some data in the body, and there are a bunch of different ways to do that via the protocol. One of the the original way, the first way we did that was back in the day. You just had a form on a web page on an HTML page, and when you hit the submit button, that told the page, "Hey, post to," and you'd put the uh, action attribute in the form tag that said what the URL that you were posting to is. So when you hit the submit button, it's like, cool, we're going to post that to that URL, and then it's going to send the response. And the way that the data was sent along with that is that form dash data format. Um, and so that's what you're going to see in a couple of the labs in the section previous to this one, um, where it's grabbing things off of the .form property of the request. So we don't do that anywhere else in the curriculum, and we don't really talk about it. I said people were a little bit confused about that, and the response was, um, it's just to show them different ways of doing it. Uh, and there's one, let me see if I can find it. There's one part that I called out specifically in the um, in the last lab of that section where it kind of abruptly switches from the form data to the JSON. The sentence is in previous lessons, we have used form data to retrieve input from the client. This is the typical approach we would take to this task, but some sites traffic in raw JSON instead. Um, that is not the typical way that well, we don't do that anywhere. We've never done that anywhere before this particular version of it. Pretty much always use JSON requests. That's just, I mean, the way it is done these days. It is very, very rare that you're going to see. If you see a site like that, it means it's very old, probably. So that is not true. I don't know why it says that, or what the experiences of the person that wrote that. But as far as the curriculum goes, and as far as like the code challenge and projects do, we're doing fetch for JSON pretty much all the time. There are other ways of doing it. That's not really what we focus on. Yeah, so I'm requesting that as being changed because it is confusing. But yeah, so for now, when it talks about getting form stuff, if you want to follow along with those lessons in the curriculum, you kind of have to use that code. But in your mind, just kind of substitute JSON. I think Saki was having a problem with that yesterday. Or was it Kathy? I can't remember. Yeah. So does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, it does, because it's similar with the Flask RESTful stuff, like the guided lessons, they use the forms.
Mhm.
And then when you switch to the lab with the React front end, it has the request.getJSON.
Yep.
And the request.getJSON, that's just what is being posted from the React app.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
what's so that's the way that we are getting that JSON. We're extracting that JSON from the body on the server side.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that answers my question though.
Awesome. Cool. Cool. Um, yeah, and I found a couple places in the curriculum where there's a little bit of abrupt changes without a lot of explanation like that. Particularly in the using the Flask RESTful library instead of using the raw, um, the basic, but just a Flask with the at decorators. Um, it's a matter of taste. I think which one of those you use. They are both equally good, and about the same level of complexity. I think it's easier to do some things in the straight up Flask way. Some things are a little bit clearer in the Flask RESTful way. We'll talk about both. And more important, I think I've said this before, the Go challenge and the projects don't care which one you use. So whichever one feels better to you, that's the one that works. Cool. Yeah, good question. So anything else before we jump in?
I think you just kind of covered it, but I was going to ask about use cases for like the decorator versus the API.get resource. So like maybe just going over some examples of if there is a difference and why we would choose one over the other.
Yeah. So and like I have a understanding of it, but not a deep experience with it. So the raw decorators, so you can use the at route and then give it methods, and then you write that weird if, else if, else if, else if, or elif, I guess, in this language. And so that lets you write stuff for specific routes, including routes with parameters. So you can do a route for slash plants, and then you do another route with slash plants ID. And the standard version has shortcuts that you can, instead of doing at route, you can do at get, at post, and so on. For me, that feels more explicit and pretty simple. What I understand about Flask RESTful is that instead of doing them straight out there in functions, it's more of a class-based approach. So you make a class for each route, basically, and then add get, post, patch, delete methods in that class. The problem happens, or the difficulty comes up, I think, when you want to make more than one set of handlers for a base route. So if you have slash plants or slash plants ID, you have to do a weird thing where you have to like subclass the class to get that extra route in there. And it feels a little clunky to me. Um, that that said, I think it might be simpler to understand for basic stuff. Um, and I think I've seen like 50-50 in the wild. Um, I tend to just use the at um, at decorators because I've never come across a use case where the flask RESTful is more useful than the other one. Uh, so yeah, that's the main differences, I think. Does that kind of get to what you're asking at? Awesome. What other questions? Cool. Sweet. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. We'll jump into it. Chat over here. There we go. So here we are. Where's it? Let's finish. There we go. Oh no. Cool. So let's look at. Do I have to read me up? Yeah, I do look at that. Cool. That's the one. Sweet. So this one should be exercising most stuff. I don't think there's a post in it, but the patches are basically covering that kind of thing. But we can easily add a post, I think. So this is a lab that is working on a plant shop, I think it is, or has something to do with plants. We're going to be building out these RESTful APIs, and we're exercising with this page here that uses fetch in JavaScript or React, same, to hit those APIs. And yeah, that's that. There was one thing I wanted to reviewing the lectures. I think there is one of them that mentions, and this is like a super picky point. One of them that said that the server was sending back JSX at some point. Um, that's not the case. JSX is only a JavaScript front end thing. I mean, not entirely true. You can do server side React, but we're not touching that. If we're sending back stuff with tags, that is sending back HTML. I don't think we ever actually do that in practice. So just wanted to make sure that was covered. So, and yeah, I think I'd like to just briefly review before we start writing code the what REST is doing for us. So again, back in the battle days, when we we call them CGI scripts, common gateway interface, and you write them in Perl or Bash or whatever you had on hand, Python sometimes, and everyone wrote everything differently, and you're still going to see URLs like that that have that use different backends that just have URLs when you hit it. That's like whatever.com slash submit email form.cgi or dot whatever. And so everyone kind of had their own different naming convention for what to hit. You didn't know if a script was like sending stuff back or rendering a page out or just submitting stuff. You could just name stuff whatever, and you'd never know what you're going to get. And it made it really difficult to interact with different websites. Pretty much all of the APIs you've used, both with JSON server and external APIs, are pretty RESTful. And REST stands for, here it is. Doesn't matter what it stands for, but it stands for representational state transfer. It doesn't matter. what what it does is it creates a standard language for us to both build our interfaces with and access interfaces that someone else has built. And what it does is it kind of collapses the language into resources, which are the nouns that we're getting. So in our case, our resource is going to be plant or plants. Your resource could be student or book or order or whatever. So those are the nouns. And those are the things that are going to show up in the URL that we see. And then the verbs are our methods that get post, patch, delete. And those map pretty much one-to-one with our CRUD actions. Post is our create, our retrieve is our get, and update and delete are our patch and delete. And so having those HTTP methods or those verbs map onto the database actions we're going to use on the back end really helps just make it clear to everyone, both people working on it and people who are consuming the API, what exactly everything is. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. It's really weird that they do a power ranking here, which wasn't the most common, but here we are. Cool. So, any overall questions about like why REST at all? Take a sip of tea. Great. So I did a little bit of this preliminary work here. I went ahead and installed all the stuff on the Python side and started up our web server on the front end here. So cannot proxy request. No, because it's not up yet. Cool. Should be fine now. No, we'll fix it. So I still need to do our migrations and seeds. So this has the migrations and seeds set up for you. We can look in our model, and we just have the one table, the one model for plants. And plants have IDs, names, images, prices, and a Boolean that is in stock. Again, prices are floats. I really hate that these examples use floats for price. It's such a bad idea. Really bad idea. I'll always use integers for money. Yeah, watch Superman 3 for why. So we've got our model here with our basic stuff here. We've got some seeds that give us 2 plants, it looks like. A ZZ plant. Okay, what's a ZZ plant? I don't know. Cool. So let's go ahead and run this migration here. And we don't need to know exactly what's going on in there because it made it all for us. But basically, it's creating the table and adding the columns for all our stuff. So to do that, we're going to run our in our server directory. We're going to run our flask db upgrade. Nope. Show. There we go. Flask db upgrade. Maybe I should be in the right directory. Yeah, here we go. Like it says in the instructions, in server. Follow the instructions. Flask db upgrade. Cool. And then we will run our seeds. Awesome. And we should be able to take a look at our database here. And see our plants. Show table. And here are the plants. We have our 2 plants. Name, image, price, and is it in stock? Yes, it is. Awesome. So we have that part done for us. We've done that before. If you're in phase 4, you should know how to do that. You have to look up like Um, yeah, cool. So in here, let's look at what we want to do. And I've started the client. That's over here. So let's start looking at what making routes looks like. Return the appropriate JSON data. Is it not having us get? That's so weird. Let's build out a get route anyway. Route. Yeah. I always make sure to say route because root is also the root of a URL. That's confusing. So let's take a look at what we have here. Let's look at our app. So we have all of our imports up top. We're importing Flask and migrations and the API and the resource are so walking through all the things. Also, we're importantly importing our database and plant from our models. So the database is just the instance of SQL Alchemy, and our class is our class as described here. So we have all that stuff. First thing we're always going to do is start up our, so with this way of doing it, we're going to create the API, and this is using the Flask RESTful. It's creating an API through the app, so it's getting an instance of the API class with our app, so it knows what to build on. So this is the main branch, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Is this all built out for us? No, there's gets there. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at what we have written for us. We have, the gets and posts are written out for us already. Interesting. Maybe I go too far. I went too far. So, and we can, this is great. We can actually do both ways here. So I can show you both of the methods of doing it. So with the Flask RESTful stuff, basically, like I said, for each resource, /plants is a resource. For that resource, we're going to create a class, which we're doing here. And to do that, we're using the resource class from Flask RESTful. And what that does, that's a class. And when we subclass it, which is what we're doing here, so plants is inheriting from resource. Plants is going to have methods. It's going to have code set up to handle those requests, call the right function for the right method, and do the right thing. And like I was saying before, this is only working on /plants. If we want to get a particular ID, we have to make a new one and hook it up to that. I guess you don't have to subclass it. You can. So after we create our plants resource, we need to add it to our API. So we're adding that class and we're saying, hey, hook it up to this route. And we're doing the same thing down here. So it is almost exactly the amount of work to do it with either way. It's just the syntax is different. So here we are creating another plant by ID resource, and this is where it starts feeling weird to me, I think, but it's all good. So we're creating a new resource that does stuff for /plants/ and then we grab the parameter out of the URL, and that's the second part of Git, or not Git. What am I talking about? Of REST is these nested resources where we're saying, cool, we're working on our plants resource and we want to get one, by ID, or it might be by title, or it might be by username, or whatever we decide. That's not really a standard. It's usually ID. Yeah, it's usually ID, but it can be whatever you like. I don't think the sort of RESTful convention specifies either way. And if we wanted to, say, have a resource that gets or have a route that gets plant plant name by ID, we would nest it again like that. So we'd have our resource, we'd get the ID, so that would get the plant with that ID, and then this would be the route that returns just the name of that plant. Not super useful in this case, but if we had like in the production company example, if we wanted to get production by ID and cast, that would return a list of the people in that production, and that could be more useful. And again, these aren't specified necessarily in REST. These are specified by you when you are creating the API for your application. So if you don't need something like that, you don't need to make it. If you only need gets for this API, you don't need to build out the other stuff. It really just depends on your use cases, your user stories for your application. And so, and just to sort of go through what this would look like otherwise, if we wanted to use just straight up Flask, we would make a different function for each one of these. So we'd say like app get, or yeah, so there's two ways of doing it. There's app route and then doing an if or a switch. Python doesn't have switches, does it? Doing an if in that. I like doing the get posts put patch shortcuts because it makes more sense to read, I think. So here I would do like app get slash, and then I'd write my function whatever self, and then this would be exactly that, and then I'd say app post, oh it's sorry slash plants, this is get post plants, and I'd write this function here, and then when I wanted to do one of these here, I do app get plants ID, and then write my function here, and it would be exactly that function, self ID. So yeah, it's like literally just a matter of like the syntax being slightly different. They work exactly the same pretty much under the hood. It's just a matter of it's a rule 2 issue. It's what is easier for you to think about, what is easier for your team to use, and so on. Any sort of questions about the difference between these two, or would you like to see more about that? Cool. And yeah, when I write my Flask apps, I usually use this way, but they, as far as I'm concerned, they're both exactly the same.
I might have overlooked it, but in the when you're doing it via the class, how does it know what the extension will be? What the there it is, right there. Okay.
Yeah. So
API.add resource plants
so
plants.
You're building it off of the API that's hooked onto your app. And this is basically just a class that kind of takes care of it wraps some of that functionality in the same way that this does.
So rather than use /plants here, for example, does it like intuit what else it has to do? So API.add resource /plants/1, for example, does it know it's gonna?
Yeah.
Or
so
is that something else that would plants by ID is a separate class? I've got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All
right, it's clicking.
So if you're using an actual framework like Rails or Django or something, that does a lot of the intuiting. It has a lot of code under the hood to do that stuff. Flask does not. Flask is super bare bones. So basically, you have to tell it every step of the way. And either these decorators or that API is going to do the web part for you. Is that?
Yep. Thank you. That answers that clicked.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I think it's kind of it's a choice between kind of the more functional, like here are the functions that do the things, and the sort of concept of here is my API, and here is this resource, and so on. That kind of breaks down when you have to do stuff like this, but it's pretty good. I don't know for sure. In my ideal world, one of the advantages of the API version would be, and I this is just me speculating, would be a method or some way to say, hey, API, publish, uh, describe what you've got. So if it let you automatically generate documentation for your API, that would be incredibly useful. And I don't think that's something that would be more difficult with the Flask stuff. I don't know if it does that or not. I would be surprised if someone had not written a tool to do it if it doesn't. But that feels like an advantage that it could have. Cool, great question though. Yeah, that was one of my confusions when I started looking at it originally too. Because like, oh yeah, it has this stuff, but it doesn't say where to get it. But yeah, it does. It's just on another line.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Other questions before we move on?
For the methods, class methods are always get post, patch and delete, right?
Yes.
And then the functionality is the class. So like if you wanna like filter or sort, that would be a new class, and then inside of it would be like the CRUD action. Is that
Can you say more about the filtering and sorting stuff?
Oh, so if you wanna like show like filtered plants in this case, that would be a new class. And then inside of the class, it'll have like get for that like specific filter, right?
Yeah, so like are you talking about like this one where you're getting it by the ID and you're
Oh yeah, yeah.
by that?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the peculiarities about the class version is that you have to write a new resource when it's actually the same resource. It's just a different path on that resource. That's where it kind of breaks down in my head. But yeah, you do have to write a different class
So if you want to filter by name, then you have to write another class for that, and then inside. Okay.
Yeah, so you do like class plant by name resource, and you'd say def get, and then do your stuff there, and then
Add
resource plant by name, and then do your filtering, and you'd be using the name variable in here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I imagine it works. I'm curious if it's smart enough to build both of those, or if it would only do one and say like, oh, this isn't no cactus isn't an ID, or I'm wondering if it's smart enough to handle both of those. I imagine it is, but I'd be curious to test it out. Great question, though. Thank you. Yeah, other questions? Cool. So yeah, let me just talk through this a little bit, and then we'll look at the new methods we want to add. So yeah, I was curious why it didn't have us building these because it built it for us already. So again, we have our plants resource, and we have a couple of methods on there, and we'll be adding a couple more. So we'll be adding our patch for the ID and the delete from the ID. Great. and we'll be adding those to these here. For the main resource, and we can see that this main resource only has a get and a post. It doesn't have the patch and delete on it. Our resource doesn't have to have all the pieces. So and they have to be named get and post because that's what the class uses. So our get, we don't need to pass anything because, and this is the, I don't know if Python folks use the same terminology, but in a lot of other frameworks, I think Django uses it. This would kind of be called an index function, where it's returning a list of all the things in that resource. But it's still a get either way. It's just on the root resource, root route of the resource. Yeah, tongue twisters. So we're going to be writing a function called get that takes itself because it's a class method. And pretty much all we're doing is, let's go inside out here. So we're doing a query all on the resource. So we're getting all of the plants. And we are, that's interesting. I don't know why it's doing that. Yes. So it's taking all the responses from the query, turning them into dictionaries. So each one of the responses, instead of being a SQL alchemy object, we're turning it into a dictionary like we always do. I don't know why that's brain fart. We're turning the query responses into a dictionary, and then we're turning each query response into a dictionary, and we are putting those in a list. So we're using a list comprehension for that. So basically, we're just making that query and getting a list of them as objects, dictionaries. And then we're just returning it. So, and this make response is the same as we would use otherwise. And we are, I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, so we're using that make response. So that's creating so HTTP is a text-based protocol, so it's always sending just strings back and forth. So we need to give it a string which contains all the information I need. So the header and the body and all that. That's what make response does. Make response takes our body data here, and so we're going to JSONify that, turning into from a list of dictionaries to a JSON string that represents that list of dictionaries. So we're taking that and we are creating a response. So make response knows to build a header. We're going to give it a response code to put in that header, and it's going to put our data in the body and return that. And so that will make that go. And let me see if that's cool. So we can actually hit this. It's running on 5. Ooh, let me see. Is that going to work? Oh, it works great. So we can see here, it's making that response, it's making that request, hitting the database and bringing back our list of objects. And we can see that request happened in our server here. So nice. If we asked for something that doesn't exist, little blarps, not found, and that should give us a 404. There we go. So this way we can see. So like if we get a request for plants like that and got a not found, we can look at that error code and say, oh, I made a typo in the request. Easy. So that's our basic get. And again, this function is going to be the same whether it's in a class or in a app.get for the plants like that. It's going to be the same function either way. It's just a matter of how we're processing that function. Any questions about that? Cool. And that is our are basic and as we say, the most popular, most common one. Cool. So if we spell plants, that will work. And you're pretty much always going to see a get request for any resource. Very few exceptions, I think. But again, it depends on what your API is for. And so let's jump down here. And this is the one that I think Saki asking about. So we're making a new class for the resource because we're going to attach it to this this route plants and then get the ID after it. So we need to make a new class for that, put it in there, and it's still just get. But this time it's taking self and the ID, and it's taking ID because we're defining it as ID on the path there. If we want to say it, identification number, we just use the same thing up there. Could be ID, could be sandwich, could be whatever. So yeah, and this is similar. So we're getting the ID. We are grabbing the plant by saying we're making a query on the resource, and we're doing that filter by ID equals ID. Yeah, filter by ID equals ID. The first ID is the ID of the resource. The second one is the ID that we're passing in. It's a little confusing that we have them named the same way, but it's fine. And then just in case there's more than one, which there shouldn't be, but either way, it's going to return us a list. So we always need to get the first one. And we are turning that response into a dictionary. Then we can just do the same thing we did before. JSONify it, make a response, send it off 200. So we see we have a plant of ID 1 here. So if we say plants/1, bada bing, there's our one plant. And again, we can see that it's doing a get to this route. So you can always debug that. And so if we have plants 10, woo, different error. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to see a lot. Get used to seeing this page. This is the page that says, oh, interesting. Should have it's a different error. This is the one that says there's an error in your code, not that the response was bad. And that will, interesting. Those are usually 500 type errors. I'm curious why it does it. Oh no, here it is. Aha, it is a 500 error. So yeah, a 500 error is sent because we're not handling it properly. If this was a real application, we would catch an exception and send a real message that said, hey, your ID wasn't found or something like that. But right now it's just, hey, I can't get that. I can't get this property of a null because that doesn't exist. So yeah, this is, yeah. And these requests are for this error page, not from your actual request. Cool. So as always, consoles and logs are great for debugging. Any more questions about getting a filtered resource like this? Kind of same, kind of different. Awesome. Cool. Good. So those are our gets. Let's look at the post. So the post again maps to our create action in CRUD. And this is, I want to talk a little bit about this here. So looking at it in isolation, let's just read through what this does. On our resource, we're making a post method. It has to be called post. And so we're saying our data equals request get JSON. I don't see request anywhere in here. So it's a little bit confusing about where we're getting that request. Again, in other frameworks or languages, often what you'll see for this kind of method, you'll see like the functions will take here's the request, here's the response, and here's something else. And so these functions will often have the request and the response passed in. These are called middleware functions because they kind of sit in between the processing of it. Flask doesn't really do that. It has middleware capabilities, but by default, it's not doing that here. So where are we getting that request data from? Any ideas? Or where are we getting the request object or whatever it is? Thoughts? So the only other place it shows up is here in this import. It's not, we're not setting it up anywhere else. This is a mildly confusing thing, I think, called a context, which is different than the context that you'll see in React, although it's called the same thing. Basically, what it's doing is by importing this from the Flask library, it's kind of creating like a pseudo global variable that when you either write the at functions or use Flask RESTful, when it starts processing the request, it knows to look for this kind of global and assign the request object to it. Some people might think that's a bad pattern, but it is common here. So this is what we use. Personally, I think it's confusing because it doesn't feel like it's scoped anywhere near where we're using it. It's just kind of floating out there. But this is how it works here. So the request is filled in this case by Flask RESTful. So when we do add resource, that's where it is kind of hooking in when we get that, when we get the request and look it up, it's assigning that request to the request's context. And so we can use it here as if it was defined somewhere in the function, which is not. So in this case, since we are writing a web application in this year of our Lord 2023 and not 2003, we are sending JSON, and so we this grabs the text out of the body of the request and turns that JSON text into an object that we can use or a dictionary. So our data will be whatever is sent, and so this is going to create a new plant model object, which we have defined in our models. So that's our new plant. It's going to take the request get JSON name, image, and price. I saw somewhere, and I don't know if this is true or not. I'm going to assume it's true. I would like to test it though. I would think that you could do that, right? Because it's just a property on the object. For some reason, I think because of what it actually turns it into, you have to use the bracket notation. I'm skeptical. I'm not convinced, but I think that is the case. So if you find yourself automatically going to dot syntax for it, like you would think you would be able to, and get an error, that's why. So we are turning our plant request object into our new plant. And then we're adding it to the session. We have our database imported here from models. So we're actually getting that. We're adding it to the session and we're committing it. And so if that all works, again, we're not catching exceptions here. In a real life application, you would be catching exceptions or catching errors and throwing exceptions saying couldn't commit to the database, like the database is down, or that already exists, or that plant name contains a word that's in our bad word list, whatever. That's where you would send back an error, and it would be a 400 type error probably. Well, depending on what it was. If it's a like, don't call a plant slur plant, that would be a 400 error. If it was this plant already exists, that would be a, well, I don't know. That would be a 400 error too, maybe. If the database was down, that would definitely be a 500 error. But we're not sending the errors back. We're just assuming that everything is going to work perfectly. And we're making our response just like the other ones. We are turning that new plant into a dictionary because right now it's a model. And we're sending a 201. Why are we sending a 201 instead of a 200?
Because it was a successful adding to the thing,
Yeah.
not just like a get.
Yeah. 200 is okay, you did good. 201 is okay, and I made the thing that you asked me to make. So yeah, there's a ton of not error codes, response codes. In a full-on application, they are very useful. Don't sweat too much. Well, it's trivia for now. Really good to know in actual practice. So yeah, let's see if that actually does the thing that we. That's a lot of big talk. Let's see if it actually works. Let's go to our React app here. So I'm gonna add a new plant name. It's gonna be a what's the plant? It's a mung bean. And mung bean plant. Golly, I like that one. I'm actually growing some mung beans right now, so I'm very excited. I have no idea what they look like, but look, apparently I'm growing them from these. Apparently they turn into these. So yeah, awesome. Put that image URL, price, they're priceless really, but let's say they're $500. And we're gonna add that plant. Let's see if it works. Cool. Unexpected token P. Uh-oh. Excellent. What did we do wrong? I love it. Let's clear that out. Make the request again. Good. Mung bean 2. Number 2. So I'm actually going to open up our network tab, clear it out. So this is again where we're seeing our this is where we're seeing our requests come and go, and we can inspect them for errors here. Look at that. Yes. So we're getting a 500 error here. We can tell because this is 500 internal server error. It's not giving us anything there. It's on the, oh yeah, look at that. Can't proxy plants from localhost to localhost 555. Why 5555? Let me restart that's weird. I think it's maybe because I started the, what you call React first. Interesting. Oh, I bet I know what's happening. Yeah, can't proxy to 5555 because I think we are, nope, it's running at 5555. Why was it saying 5,000 before? Wait a minute. Why does it say we're running on 5,000?
Is it the startup rules, maybe? The like export Flask app equals thing?
Yeah. Oh, you know why it is? Because I started it with Flask run instead of running this. That's, yeah, that pointed me in the right direction now. So yeah, I can just run Python. The problem with this is it doesn't reload when you make a change, I think. Oh, or it might. Let's see. So now it's running on 555. And this is why we weren't seeing plants when it loaded first. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. No. Mhm. Fascinating. Still can't proxy plants. Why? That's really interesting. I'll try one more time now that it's actually running. First, let me make sure it's running on the right port. This is how we debug. Aha. So it says it's running. L-A-N-T-S. Wow, maybe I'm spelling it wrong. Cool. So it is getting us plants. Let me. Oh, did I not restart the? Restart it. How about that? Hey, that sounds nope, good. Still saying can't do that. Let's put that proxy plants to 5555. Why? Why? Um, Fascinating. Hmm. So here is a minor quibble I have with the way some things are done in the curriculum. When we are starting up here, so in our package JSON for our React, it's setting a proxy. So let me walk through what's happening here. We are running our client on port 3000. When it is making requests, let's look at the source. Oh, remember React? Barely do. So it is just requesting slash plants, which you would think would be on this resource here. Clearly not doing what we wanted because it is trying to proxy from 3000. So basically, proxying means that we have our thing running, in this case, a React application on port 3000. When we make requests that can't be handled by our React app, so there's no slash plants route on React, it should hit the proxy port that we've set up in our package JSON. And so that should send any requests from here to localhost 5555 instead of 3000. For some reason, it says that it can't do that. I'm curious why. In most situations outside of this context, you would be running these on different ports, and you would have, like it said, we don't have to here, which we might have to. It's saying we don't need to use 555 here because we're proxying. I think I don't remember exactly why this is doing it. I remember there was a reason. And I'm curious if anyone else is doing this lab and can get it to work. But I am going to use localhost 555 here because it clearly does not work. I'm going to look for anywhere else where we do a fetch. Not there. Maybe this new plant form. Yeah, there we go. Any other fetches? I think those are only fetches. No fetch there. No fetch there. Cool. So basically the way I'm solving this now is instead of trying to proxy, I'm just having it hit the actual URL that it should be hitting. Yeah, I'm a big not fan of structuring your applications like this. I like peanut butter and chocolate separate because you don't have to deal with problems like this. So let's take a look again. Let's reload our plants and failed to load response. No data found for resource with given identifier. Let's try this again. Run. Okay, great. That works. So let's do some more debugging. It's concerning that this does not work out of the box. So
Not to make it more confusing, but mine does work right out
it
of the
does work.
box.
Amazing. Oh no, what did I do wrong? Are you on a Mac or Windows? Or
On a Mac.
really? Okay, that was my prime suspect because I think there's a sometimes there's a port that doesn't work. But I thought it was 5,000, so that is clearly not it. Interesting. So this clearly does work. We are getting things from 55555 plants. Let me just double check that it is trying to hit the right thing. Well, we should be able to see the request here, right? Actually, I'm going to close this all the way. I'm just going to restart our node client. It looks like it rebuilt successfully, but just to be sure, I'm going to do it by hand. Cool. Cool. Don't know why you're in the other window, but let's bring you back over here where you belong. All right, we'll open up the console and access the fetch. Oh, it's a CORS thing. That's why. So your proxying is working?
Yeah, but I still get the errors that says proxy error, but I did a post and everything is working like it should be.
Fascinating. Um, Interesting. So that's really weird. So you're able to do the post, but not the get?
No, both of mine work.
Oh, both of yours work. Wild. Um, let me change it back just to make sure I'm not doing anything dumb. Um, yeah. Wow. Okay, why would it not let me do that? Let's do some Googling. Let's think about plants. Flask. I'm not running a Docker. um, and that is that in the package JSON. Yeah. Oh no, it is. Haha. Wonder if that's the case. Okay. Interesting. And in your package JSON, it says localhost, right?
I'm gonna go with yes, probably package JSON if I could find it somewhere. Yeah, I didn't change anything. It was as is.
Fascinating. I wonder why on my machine it doesn't think localhost is that. Interesting. Well, sweet. Good debugging, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Stack Overflow. I'll look into why that is a thing later on. Sweet. So let's get our mung bean plan back. Where are we? Here's our React app. Great. So here's our two plants. Fantastic. Let's do our mung beans. Let's do our image, and maybe it just didn't like those. So expensive. And so we can look at our network panel again, actually. And let's add the plant. Hey, look at that. So we made a request to localhost 3000 plants. There was one funny thing. It is a post, and payload is where you're going to see the body. And so this is the image, or the object that we put together. It has the image, name, and price. And if we look at our database, is it there? Maybe, who knows? Yeah, cool. And so now it is in here. We don't know if it's in stock or not. Naughty, naughty. because when we do our insert, we're not putting an in stock. So we probably would say in stock stack. We put our in stock is true there, I assume, but right now we're just adding the name, image, and price. Cool. Oh boy. Sweet. So that's how you would do a post. Making that request. And we're actually kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit because this is part of the hooking it up part. Looking at just from the server side, though, we are receiving a post request for this resource with that payload, with that body in there. We're grabbing the data out of the body. We're creating a new plant model out of that, and we're adding it to our session, like committing it to the database, and we're going to have a different kind of session later on. Don't get confused now, though. And now we are making a response with that data, turning it into an object and saying, you did it. Good job. And then our thing is rendering it there. There's our pretty mung beans. Cool. Any questions about this part? Cool. And so this exercise is pretty much everything like out of the box that we need to worry about for like code challenge even. Well, minus one thing. Getting our server set up, hooking up our models in our SQL Alchemy database hookup, either through the at decorators or the class, building these functions to exercise our models and then either grab information out of them or send stuff back. That's literally all there is to it. There's not a whole lot more. I mean, you can do a lot more with it, but then it's just writing Python, which is tricky by itself for some things. Yeah, and so the one thing that we're not talking about today, which we might talk about Friday or maybe tomorrow, depending on where y'all are at, is the resources. So if we have, I'm sorry, the relationships. So if we have a plant that has many buyers through orders or whatever, we would be using a called serializer to include all that data with that, or show those relationships in some way, or access those through SQL Alchemy. But y'all did that for your code challenge in phase 3, so that should be not a huge problem. Sweet, last call for questions before we go on to add our new patch and delete routes. Cool. And you know what? I actually have those written. So I'm just gonna copy paste them instead of pretending to type them all out, and we'll talk through them the same way. So yeah, so let's look at what it's asking first. So our deliverables, first off, are, well, yeah, we'll do one order. So making a patch request to this route, which is this route here, with an object in the body. And so that is going to look like this. We are sending JSON data over with our patch request, and patch is updating an existing record in there. So when we send just this information, it's going to get the entire record and replace just the one field. There's a subtle difference between patch and put. Probably not going to see put very often. And they work basically identically, but semantically, patch means that you're replacing you're updating one or more fields in the column, and put means that you're replacing it with an entire new object. For our purposes, patch is always going to be fine, but it's a fun interview question if that ever comes up. But super not important. So let's look at what we're doing here. We are yeah. I'm going to move this up here. No, I'm going to get rid of that altogether. Bam. Cool. So we are already adding this plant by ID resource to this path because we did our get plant by ID. So we can use that same route with a plant/number to do our patches and deletes. So we are patching a specific plant, and we're going to do the same thing that we did up here. And pretty much for post patch, you're always going to be doing request get JSON because that's the stuff you need. So we're getting the body that we're sending. So it's going to look like this with just the key value pairs for the thing that we want to update. And again, we're doing our query just like we did in the get because we need to get that plant. We need to find the plant that we're updating. In this case, we're finding the plant that we are getting. And importantly here, we're not turning it into a dictionary because we want to operate on that resource, such as here. And so this is pretty, again, this is just Python. We are saying we're looping through the JSON that we got. So since we are expecting a single object, that means we are looping through the keys in that object. And so in this example case, the key is in stock, but it could be any or all of these. Not ID. Don't update IDs manually. But so this is going to go through each key in the data that we got, and it's just going to, and this is a really roundabout way of doing it, but I guess you can do it. No, that's right. So we're just setting that key on the plant to the matching piece of data in our request. And then just like when we added it there, we're going to add it to our session, commit it, and return the entire resource that we updated. And it says to do that there. Jason, yeah.
So just as a matter of connecting some of what we did in phase 3 to this, would this be a circumstance where you might be able to have like a class instance method that would handle some of this logic, and then you can just, once you have once you've done the plant query and you've got the first entry, could you call the instance method on that entry and just have it do some of this stuff? I'm just wondering where that kind of thing connects in, because it seems like we kind of moved away from using them at all, like class methods, instance methods, and that kind of thing. So
yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. So kind of the way that we did a lot of stuff manually in phase 1 in JavaScript that React takes care for that does for us without having to write that code. Basically, that's what SQL Alchemy is doing here. The classes and relationships and stuff we built manually in Python in phase 3 kind of mirrors the stuff that SQL Alchemy gives us. So I see what you're asking. So right now we're using those class methods and all that. They're just pre-built ones, so we're not running ourselves. So that query is a class method or a instance method on the plant. Sorry, on the plant class, it's a class method getting that. And then when we work with the plant that comes back, that's an instance method. So this stuff here, I see what you're saying. We could, if we wanted to, it feels a little overkill here, but I can see cases where we want to do it. Write a method that says, hey, plant, update yourself with this JSON object.
Right. That's exactly, I think, what I'm asking. Like, In this case, it's small, a very small amount of data, but I can imagine if it was like, like some of the API entries, for example, that we were dealing with, if you want to, okay.
And really, there's no reason you can't do that. If you wanted to say, I mean, in this case, you would say like, class, super plant, and then, wrote your class methods and stuff here. You would still have, and that's the cool part about subclassing, right? You would still have all the cool stuff that you get from SQL Alchemy, plus whatever functionality you add on top of it. So you definitely could write a class that subclasses your resource and then adds that functionality. You could write a library that wraps SQL Alchemy all together and says, hey, when you create a resource, add these methods to the resource, so you don't have to do it for each one. Yeah, you could definitely do that. It's a little bit of a climb to figure that out, but yeah, I mean that's what Flask RESTful is. It's just wrapping other stuff in, giving us these get posts, patch delete methods. Yeah, so that's a good instinct for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but in this case, it's just 2 lines, so a little bit overkill. But yeah, you can totally do that for sure. Awesome question. Anything else about this one? And very, very similar to our posts.
For line like 54, are we just using attribute like can it be any variable, like if we said like for potato in data, like, and then just change all of them to potato, like what can we do that, or does it have to be ATTR?
Yeah, this is just a name.
Okay, cool. And same with data in line 50, like can that be?
Yeah, so as long as it's the same as what we set up here.
Okay, so gotcha.
Yeah, because the data is, and personal opinion, data is the worst variable name you could use because it tells you absolutely nothing about it. You may as well call it X. But yeah, you could. I would call it something descriptive instead of data. But yeah, as long as it matches up there, you can call it whatever you want. Yeah,
cool, thank you.
These are just variables. They're not anything special. Awesome. Any more questions before we look at our last baby one here? Cool. And yeah, so this last route, super easy. We are making a delete request to the same route with the ID, and all it's doing is deleting the plant from the database. And it's going to return nothing with a 204 code. There's nothing there. And again, we're doing almost exactly the same thing. We're doing there's no JSON to get, there's no data to get. Sorry, because delete doesn't have a body. There's no need for it because we're just getting rid of something. So we don't need to get the JSON of it. We are getting the ID. And so we're doing the same thing. Since I see this 3 times, my instinct would be to write something that does that. But again, diminishing returns. So again, we're just querying and getting that plant. And then we just say, hey, delete it. Delete that model and commit. And then we just return our response. And since both of these, since the class, and this is where the Flask RESTful stuff, it's kind of nice. If you're writing these instead of doing an at for each route, you're adding the response, you're adding the class to a single route. I think it adds up to about the same amount of work either way. It's more of a brain processing cost than anything else. But yeah, so that's that. Yeah, and aside from the serialization, like this is all you need to know for building out an API. The stuff you're going to build for your project is probably going to be a little more complex, but it's not going to be, this part is going to be exactly the same. The complexity is going to come in your relationships and whatever Python you have to write to make stuff do what you want. The SQL Alchemy, RESTful stuff, Flask stuff is going to be pretty much identical. It's just going to be different logic, or business logic, as they say. Yeah, cool. I think that's all I've got here. Um, this felt good, like just kind of talking through all the stuff instead of pretending to write it. Like it's pretty straightforward. Um, any questions overall, I guess. We've been here for almost an hour and a half.
Um, for the stuff you mentioned earlier, like on line 45 and 50 are pretty much the same thing, right? And for
Mm,
delete as well.
yeah.
I tried to like bring them out to like like a common variable inside of the plant by ID
Mhm.
class. It didn't work for some reason.
Oh, and so you had it like on a
Under yeah, on line 43, I brought them out
hmm.
there. So each class methods can access plant
Oh, did
instead.
you just like have it like that?
And I don't know why, but it didn't work that way.
Yeah,
It should, right?
yeah. So the class variable is probably still there, but it runs this at the time of creating the class. So since these are the functions that are going to be run for each request, so
Uh-huh.
when we get a request for our get, for example, it's calling this function, and since it's going to be a different ID,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
it needs to do this here. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, does that make more sense?
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Um, what
very confused.
and that's actually again really good instinct, and it kind of gets to what I was kind of aiming at before. What I might want to do is, and this is not the syntax necessarily to do it, but I might do a like you know get by ID. Or I'm just gonna go get ID. Let's get by ID. Um, self ID. And then I'd say, return um, uh, plant
Oh,
query, all this basically. And then here I would just say
let's call the function
self
instead.
by ID
Um,
like that. So, and again, it's about the same amount of work here, but conceptually, I think this makes it a little clearer. Um, if if I'm reading someone else's code, and someone else could be me a month ago, if I'm reading that code and seeing this line, um, it might be slightly different each time. And or if it is the same every time, I'm still going to read each line to make sure it's not different, because I'm never sure if I can't just assume. So if I write a function that does this common functionality, um, then at least like if it is a little bit different here, I can see um, self ID. I can see, oh, hey, I am doing that common thing, but I'm also doing something else to it. So yeah, that's a really good instinct to pretty much anytime you see a piece of code repeated more than twice, I think it's a good instinct to say like, hey, should I refactor that out into a function or a method? Yeah, but you need to, since it is a different ID potentially every time, you need to make that call every time. Does that make sense?
thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. Um, and I don't know if this works or not, so don't take my word for it. It should work. Um, we can find out right now. Maybe not. What did I do? Oh, it's not running. That's why. Because I broke something. Yeah, that works. Great. Yeah, if you want to like when kind of like when we were back in phase one, when we had to write, document.get element by ID all the time. And I wrote a function that was like EL. Kind of the same thing. It's like not really necessary, but just conceptually, like, oh, I'm doing this thing over and over again. I'm just gonna write a function to do that thing. Yeah, good instinct. Um, Any other questions? Awesome. There's everybody. So yeah, this is pretty much all you need to know for the whole like building a RESTful API part. Again, serialization is something that we'll hit soon. And we'll talk about writing like I don't know we have to do it again, but you've written the React side of this before, hitting JSON server, exactly the same thing. It's just your own server. So yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit. See what y'all need. I don't want to talk at you for no reason and waste your time. So hopefully this was helpful. Any thoughts? Anything else before we close up shop? Feeling good? All right. I'll post this video in the usual places. And yeah, I'll see y'all in a little bit. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.